The first generation of exiles died angry and heartbroken. They spent their final years telling stories of Earth to children who would never see a blue sky or feel real wind on their faces. They described oceans and mountains and forests until their voices gave out, desperate to keep the memory alive. The second generation grew up in metal corridors and recycled air. They learned about their lost homeworld from recordings and photographs, but it never felt real to them. Earth was a legend, a fairy tale, a place that existed only in the dreams of their parents and grandparents. By the time the third generation came of age, humanity had changed. The endless darkness outside their ships had become normal. The cramped living spaces, the rationed food, the constant hum of engines, these were the only realities they had ever known. They stopped looking back at what was lost and started looking forward to what might be found. Samantha Blake was born on a research vessel called the New Dawn, 70 years after the exile began. She grew up surrounded by scientists who spent their lives studying the strange space between galaxies. The void was not truly empty, they discovered. It was filled with particles and energies that no one in the Milky Way had ever encountered. Samantha showed exceptional talent for physics from a young age. By 20, she was leading her own research team. By 30, she had published more papers than scientists twice her age. But her greatest discovery came when she was 43 years old, on an ordinary day that would change the course of human history. She was analyzing data from the sensor array when she noticed something strange. There was an energy signature in the void that did not match any known phenomenon. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. She spent 6 months studying it, running tests, building theories, and tearing them down. Finally, she understood. The void between galaxies was filled with a form of energy that the Council races had never discovered. It existed everywhere, surrounding everything, waiting to be harnessed. She called it void energy, and it would become the foundation of a new civilization. News of the discovery spread through the fleet like wildfire. Engineers and physicists from every ship gathered to study Samantha's findings. Within a decade, they had built the first void energy reactor. Within 20 years, they had developed engines that could fold space itself, allowing ships to cross vast distances in moments. Within 50 years, humanity possessed technology that surpassed anything the Galactic Council had ever created. Admiral Connor Hayes was a military man from a long line of military men. His great-grandfather had served under Daniel Carter during the exile. His grandfather had commanded the first armed patrol of the Void Fleet. His father had died defending a convoy from raiders who preyed on weaker ships. Connor understood that survival required more than hope. It required strength. He oversaw the construction of the Reclamation, the first true warship of the new era. It was 3 kilometers long, powered by 12 void reactors, and armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. When Connor walked its corridors for the first time, he felt something he had not felt in years: pride. "This ship represents everything we have become," he told his officers. "The Council thought they were sending us to die. Instead, they forced us to evolve. We are stronger now than we ever were before." Meanwhile, a woman named Laura Chen was solving a different problem. The fleet could not drift forever. People needed a home, solid ground beneath their feet, a place to build and grow. She led an expedition to a rogue planet drifting through the void, a world that had been ejected from its solar system billions of years ago, and now wandered alone in the darkness. The planet was frozen and lifeless, but it had rock and metal and ice. Laura landed with a team of engineers and began the work of transformation. They drilled deep into the planet's core, using void energy to generate heat. They built domes and tunnels and underground cities. They created artificial sunlight and grew crops in hydroponic farms. Within a generation, The planet had a population of 10 million. They named it Refuge, and it became the capital of what the humans now called the Terran Dominion. 300 years passed. Children grew old and died, never knowing anything but the void. The stories of Earth faded into myth, but the anger remained. Every human child learned about the exile, about the Council's cruelty, about the promise of return. By the year 2487, the Terran Dominion had grown into something that would have been unrecognizable to the first exiles. 20 colonies spread across rogue planets and artificial habitats. A population of 40 billion. A fleet of warships that numbered in the hundreds, each one capable of devastating an entire system. Samantha Blake, now in her 90s, but still sharp as ever, watched from Refuge as the latest generation of ships was launched. She had lived long enough to see her discovery transform her people from refugees into conquerors. A young officer named Eric Santos approached her during the launch ceremony. He was eager, ambitious, and hungry for the chance to prove himself. "Dr. Blake, do you think we are ready? Ready to go back?" Samantha looked at him with eyes that had seen more history than most libraries contained. "We have been ready for 100 years, Captain. The only question is whether we are ready to show mercy when the time comes. Power is easy. Restraint is hard." Eric did not fully understand her words then. He would later, when he faced choices that would define the future of two civilizations. The Terran Dominion began sending scout ships to the edge of the Milky Way, watching and waiting. They observed Council patrols, studied their movements, assessed their capabilities. The reports that came back confirmed what many had suspected. The Council races had stagnated. They had grown fat and lazy, confident in their superiority, never imagining that the exiled humans would return. Admiral Hayes reviewed the intelligence reports in his quarters aboard the Reclamation. Maps of Council space covered his walls, showing every system, every fleet, every weakness. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His father and grandfather had prepared before him. Soon, he whispered to himself. Very soon. Outside his window, the void stretched endlessly in all directions. But now, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a launching point, a place where humanity had gathered its strength before the final leap. The long dark was almost over. The return was about to begin. Captain Eric Santos commanded the Terran destroyer Silent Vengeance on routine patrol near the Galactic Rim. His crew of 200 operated with quiet efficiency, monitoring sensors and maintaining systems that would have seemed like magic to the ancestors who had fled this galaxy 3 centuries ago. Eric was thinking about his grandmother when the sensor officer called out. She had been a child during the early days of the exile, and she had told him stories about the stars of the Milky Way until he could recite the names of constellations he had never seen. "Captain, we have a contact. Single vessel bearing 047 Mark 12. It just dropped out of hyperspace." Eric straightened in his command chair. "Identification?" "Running analysis now, sir." The officer paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was tight with emotion. "Captain, it is a Valkyrie exploration vessel. Council design, approximately 300 meters long." Silence fell across the bridge. Every crew member knew what the Valkyrie had done. Every human alive knew. The species that had orchestrated their exile, that had argued for their extermination, was now sitting in their sensor range. Eric's first officer, a woman named Patricia Gomez, moved to stand beside him. "Orders, Captain?" Eric took a moment to steady himself. His hands wanted to tremble, but he would not allow them. "Hail them. Standard frequencies." The communications officer worked his console. "Channel open, sir." "Valkyrie vessel, this is Captain Eric Santos of the Terran Dominion warship Silent Vengeance. You have entered our patrol zone. Reduce speed and prepare to be scanned. Long seconds passed. Then the reply came, and Eric heard something in the alien voice that he had never expected to hear from a Velkari. Fear. This is Commander Vethral of the exploration vessel Crystal Dawn. We do not recognize your authority. Humans were exiled from this galaxy by order of the Galactic Council. Your presence here is a violation of that decree. Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh. They still think they can give us orders. Eric kept his face neutral, but inside he felt the same bitter amusement. Velkari vessel. The Terran Dominion does not recognize the authority of the Galactic Council. Your exile ended nothing. It only delayed the inevitable. Power down your weapons and engines, or we will disable them for you. The Velkari commander's response was to accelerate toward the galactic core. His ship was fast by Council standards, capable of outrunning most threats he might encounter. But he had never encountered anything like the Silent Vengeance. They are running, the sensor officer reported. Maximum acceleration toward Council space. Eric nodded slowly. He understood what would happen if that ship reached home and reported what it had seen. The Council would know that humanity had returned. The element of surprise would be lost. But he also knew that this moment had always been coming. The question was never whether the Council would learn of their return, only when. Pursue, he ordered. Weapons free. The Silent Vengeance leaped forward, space folding around it as the void drive engaged. Within seconds, they had closed the distance to the fleeing Velkari ship. The enemy vessel attempted evasive maneuvers, but it was like watching a ground vehicle try to outrun a spacecraft. Targeting their engines, the weapons officer announced, firing. Twin beams of concentrated void energy lanced through space. They struck the Crystal Dawn's engine section and tore through it like paper. The Velkari ship tumbled, trailing debris and atmosphere, its ability to flee destroyed in a single heartbeat. Eric opened a channel. Velkari vessel, your engines are disabled. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated according to the conventions of war. Continue to resist, and you will be destroyed. The response took a long time coming. When Commander Vethral spoke again, his voice had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something like despair. How is this possible? Humans had no technology capable of this. Our sensors show energy readings that make no sense. 300 years is a long time, Commander. We had plenty of opportunity to improve ourselves. Now, do you surrender? The Velkari vessel powered down its remaining systems. A shuttle was dispatched to take the crew prisoner. Eric watched through the bridge viewport as the crystalline aliens were escorted aboard his ship, their light-bending bodies flickering with confusion and terror. He felt no satisfaction, only a cold certainty that everything was about to change. News of the encounter reached the Terran Dominion capital within hours. Chancellor Amanda Wright convened an emergency meeting of the War Council in the deep chambers beneath Refuge's surface. Around her sat the most powerful humans in existence, admirals and generals and intelligence chiefs who had spent their lives preparing for this moment. Admiral Hayes arrived last, his face grim. The Velkari prisoners have been interrogated. They managed to send a distress signal before we disabled their communications. The Council knows we are here. A murmur ran through the assembled leaders. Chancellor Wright raised her hand for silence. How long before they respond? Unknown, Chancellor. But we should assume they will mobilize their fleets within days. Intelligence Officer Kevin Moore activated a holographic display showing Council space. Our analysis suggests they are not prepared for us. Their military has not fought a major war in over 2 centuries. Their technology has advanced very little since the exile. They believed we were dead. They hoped we were dead, Patricia Gomez corrected. She had been promoted after the encounter, and now served as Hayes's chief of staff. There is a difference. Chancellor Wright studied the display for a long moment. She was a tall woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much hardship to be softened by anything as simple as victory. Her grandparents had died during the early years of the exile, starving when their ship's food supplies ran low. She carried that memory with her always. "We have a choice," she said finally. "We can strike now, while they are confused and frightened, or we can wait. See how they respond. Give them a chance to avoid war." Hayes leaned forward. "Chancellor, with respect, they had their chance 300 years ago. They chose to exile us instead of living in peace. They chose cruelty when mercy was available. We owe them nothing." "I am not suggesting we owe them anything, Admiral. I am suggesting that we are better than them. We always have been. If we attack without warning, we become the monsters they claimed we were." The debate continued for hours. Some argued for immediate invasion. Others counseled patience. In the end, Chancellor Wright made her decision. "We will make them an offer. A chance to make things right. If they refuse, we will do what must be done. But the choice will be theirs." She authorized the deployment of the Reclamation Fleet, 200 warships armed with void weapons, to the border of Council space. They would wait there, a message written in steel and fire. "We remember. What happens next is up to you." Admiral Hayes transmitted a single broadcast to the Council, his words reaching every species that had participated in humanity's exile. "The Terran Dominion requests a formal audience with the Galactic Council. We have much to discuss. You have 1 standard week to respond. After that, we will assume our request has been denied and act accordingly." The message spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. On 100 worlds, beings who had never seen a human looked up at the stars and felt something they had not felt in 300 years. Fear. Humanity had returned. The Galactic Council chamber had not seen such chaos in 500 years. Representatives of 12 ancient species shouted over each other, their voices mixing into a noise that sounded like the end of the world. Perhaps it was. The Thexian ambassador coiled and uncoiled his serpentine body, his 6 eyes darting from face to face as he hissed demands for immediate military action. "We must strike now, before they grow stronger. Send every fleet we have to crush them while we still can." The Navari delegate, a being made of living shadow that shifted constantly between forms, spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Strike with what? Our fleets are scattered across the galaxy. It would take months to assemble a force large enough to challenge what our scouts have described." "Then we have months," the Thexian snapped. "Better late than never." The Velkari High Speaker sat on his crystalline throne and said nothing. His light-bending body had grown dim since news of the human return had reached him. He had been young when the exile was ordered, barely a century old. He had believed, as they all had believed, that the problem of humanity had been solved forever. They were wrong. A messenger entered the chamber and approached the High Speaker with a data tablet. The Velkari leader read its contents, and his body dimmed further. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "The human fleet has entered Council space. 200 warships. They are approaching the inner systems without resistance. None of our patrols have dared to engage them." The chamber fell silent. 200 warships. The entire Council Navy numbered perhaps 500 combat-capable vessels, spread across a galaxy that contained 10,000 inhabited systems. The humans had brought nearly half that number to their doorstep in a single fleet. "What do they want?" the Navari delegate asked. "They sent a message requesting an audience. What do they want?" "Does it matter?" the Thexian replied. "They want revenge. They want blood. They are savages, remember? That is why we exiled them." The High Speaker finally rose from his throne. "We will grant their request. We will hear what they have to say. If there is any chance to avoid war, we must take it." The Phyrexian ambassador made a sound of disgust, but did not argue further. He knew, as they all knew, that there was no real choice. The council could fight or it could negotiate, but it could not ignore what was coming. 3 days later, the reclamation fleet took up position in orbit around the council's capital world. Admiral Connor Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet turn slowly below. It was a beautiful world, covered in purple forests and silver oceans. It had never known war, never felt the pain that humanity had endured. That was about to change, one way or another. Commander Megan Torres piloted the diplomatic shuttle that would carry Chancellor Wright to the surface. Megan was the granddaughter of Daniel Carter, the admiral who had witnessed the original exile decree. She had grown up hearing stories about that day, about the way her grandfather had stood before the council and been told that his people were not worthy of existence. Now she was flying the Chancellor of the Terran Dominion to demand answers from those same species. The universe had a strange sense of justice. Chancellor Wright sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing her notes one final time. She had practiced this speech 100 times, but she knew that words would only take her so far. The council would either accept her terms or they would not. If they refused, millions would die. She hoped they would choose wisdom, but she was prepared for the alternative. The shuttle landed in a plaza outside the council chamber. Megan emerged first, her hand resting on the weapon at her hip. Behind her came a squad of Terran Marines in full combat armor, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They were a message as much as a security detail. "We are not afraid of you anymore." Chancellor Wright walked through the chamber doors with her head high and her shoulders straight. She wore a simple black uniform, unadorned, except for a single medal pinned over her heart. It was the medal her great-grandmother had received for service during the exile, one of the first honors created by the fledgling Terran Dominion. The council members watched her approach in silence. She saw fear in some of their eyes, hatred in others, resignation in a few. She cared only about what they would do. She stopped at the center of the chamber, exactly where Secretary General Hughes had stood 300 years ago when he pleaded for humanity's survival. She did not plead. "My name is Amanda Wright, Chancellor of the Terran Dominion. I speak for 40 billion humans who were exiled from this galaxy by your order. I speak for the billions who died in the void, never knowing if their sacrifice would mean anything. I speak for every child who grew up in darkness, dreaming of stars they could never reach." She paused and let her words sink in. The chamber remained silent. "You believed you were sending us to die. You hoped we would fade away and be forgotten. Instead, we survived. We adapted. We grew stronger than you ever imagined possible. Now we have returned, and we have demands." The Phyrexian ambassador could not contain himself. "Demands? You dare to make demands of the Galactic Council? You are still the same arrogant primitives you always were." Chancellor Wright turned her gaze to him, and something in her eyes made the serpent fall silent. "The Terran Dominion demands a formal apology for the exile and all the suffering it caused. We demand the return of all former human territories, including Earth and every colony that was taken from us. We demand full membership in this council, with equal voting rights. And we demand reparations from the Velkari Collective, who orchestrated our exile, to compensate for 300 years of injustice." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted protests, hurled insults, demanded that the human be arrested and executed. But the Marines around Chancellor Wright did not flinch, and the fleet in orbit did not move. They all knew that any attempt at violence would end badly. The High Speaker raised his hand for silence. It took longer than before, but eventually, the noise died down. He looked at Chancellor Wright with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "These demands are excessive," he said. "No species has ever been given such concessions. You ask for more than we can give." "I ask for exactly what we are owed," Chancellor Wright replied. "Nothing more, nothing less. You took everything from us. Our home, our future, our place among the stars. Now you will give it back." The High Speaker's form flickered with agitation. "And if we refuse?" Chancellor Wright smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "If you refuse, then the reclamation fleet will demonstrate exactly how much we learned during our time in the void. We will start with the Valkyrie homeworld and work our way through every system that voted for our exile. By the time we are finished, there will be no council left to refuse anything." She turned and walked toward the exit, her Marines falling into formation around her. At the door, she paused and looked back one final time. "You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely. We have waited 300 years for justice. We can wait one more day." The shuttle lifted off, carrying her back to the fleet. Behind her, the council descended into arguments that would last through the night. Some called for surrender, some called for war. The Valkyrie High Speaker said nothing at all. He was thinking about all the humans who had died in the void, all the suffering his species had caused, all the arrogance that had led them to believe they could destroy an entire people without consequence. He was thinking about how wrong they had been. The Valkyrie High Speaker delivered his response exactly 23 hours after Chancellor Wright departed. He stood before the council, his crystalline body pulsing with defiance, and spoke words that would doom his civilization. "The Galactic Council rejects the human demands. We will not apologize for protecting ourselves from a dangerous species. We will not surrender territory to invaders. We will not pay tribute to those we cast out. The humans may have survived the void, but they are still barbarians. They have no place among us." Within an hour, the Terran Dominion declared war on the Valkyrie Collective. Admiral Connor Hayes had been preparing for this moment his entire life. He stood on the bridge of the Reclamation, surrounded by officers who shared his determination, and gave the order that would reshape the galaxy. "All ships, engage void drives. Target is the Valkyrie homeworld. We end this today." 200 warships folded space and vanished from Council territory. They reappeared seconds later in orbit around the Valkyrie homeworld, a glittering planet of crystal spires and geometric cities that had stood for 10,000 years. The Valkyrie had assembled their entire defensive fleet to meet the human threat. Over 50 warships hung in orbit, their weapons charged and ready. Behind them, a network of orbital platforms bristled with cannons that had been ancient before humanity learned to use fire. Admiral Hayes studied the enemy formation and felt something close to pity. They had no idea what they were facing. "All ships, fire at will." The Vord weapons spoke. Beams of energy that bent reality itself lanced out from the Terran fleet, passing through shields as if they did not exist. Valkyrie warships exploded in cascades of light and shattered crystal. The orbital platforms, those ancient defenses that had never been breached, crumbled under the assault like sandcastles before the tide. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, not a single Valkyrie military vessel remained operational. The sky above their homeworld was filled with debris and death, and the Terran fleet had not lost a single ship. Captain Eric Santos led the ground assault. His Marines deployed in dropships that fell like meteors through the Valkyrie atmosphere, slamming into the ground around the planetary capital. The crystalline inhabitants tried to resist, but their weapons could not penetrate Terran armor, and their numbers could not match Terran discipline. Eric fought his way through the streets of the capital, past shattered buildings and fallen defenders, until he reached the government complex where the Valkyrie leaders had taken refuge. He kicked down the doors and found the High Speaker cowering in a throne room that had witnessed millennia of alien history. "It is over," Eric said. "Order your forces to surrender. No more of your people need to die." The High Speaker looked up at him with eyes that no longer bent light, that had grown dull with defeat. "You could have been our allies once. We could have welcomed you as friends. Instead, we feared you. We tried to destroy you. And now you have destroyed us." "We have not destroyed you," Eric replied. "We have defeated you. There is a difference. Learn it." Chancellor Wright arrived on the planet the following day. She walked through the ruins of a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could order the Valkyrie exterminated. She could burn their world and scatter their people across the stars to wander as humanity had wandered. It would be justice, some would say, an eye for an eye, an exile for an exile. But she remembered what Dr. Samantha Blake had said about mercy and restraint. She remembered that humanity had been judged as monsters, and she refused to prove them right. The Treaty of Submission was signed in the ruins of the Valkyrie capital. The collective surrendered its seat on the council, its military forces, and its right to self-governance. They would be supervised by Terran administrators for a century, long enough to ensure they never threatened anyone again. But they would survive. Their children would grow up under human rule, but they would grow up. The other council species surrendered without a fight. They had seen what happened to the Valkyrie, and they had no desire to share that fate. One by one, they signed the Treaty of Earth, acknowledging human sovereignty over their reclaimed territories, and accepting the Terran Dominion as the supreme power in the galaxy. 3 months after the war ended, Admiral Hayes brought the Reclamation to Earth orbit. It was the first human warship to visit humanity's homeworld since the Exile, and every member of the crew found reasons to stand near viewports and stare at the planet below. Earth had changed. 3 centuries without human presence had allowed nature to reclaim what civilization had built. Forests covered the ruins of cities. Rivers ran through streets that had once been crowded with vehicles. Animals roamed freely across continents that had been shaped by human hands for 10,000 years. But it was still Earth, still home. Dr. Samantha Blake stood beside Hayes, her ancient eyes fixed on the blue and green world she had dreamed about all her life. She had been born in the void, raised on stories of a planet she had never seen. Now she was 97 years old, and she was finally coming home. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "more beautiful than I ever imagined." Hayes nodded slowly. "We will rebuild it, better than before. We owe that much to everyone who died believing they would never see it again." Governor Scott Palmer was appointed to oversee the restoration of Earth. Millions of humans volunteered to return, leaving their comfortable lives on Refuge and the other colonies to rebuild the world their ancestors had been forced to abandon. They planted gardens in the wreckage of old cities. They cleaned rivers that had run wild for 300 years. They built new homes on foundations that held the memories of generations. Chancellor Wright traveled to Earth for the first anniversary of the restoration. She stood on the steps of a building that had once housed the United Nations, rebuilt now as a monument to human endurance. Behind her stood representatives from every corner of the Terran Dominion, from every generation ship that had survived the long dark, from every colony that had been carved out of the void. 300 years ago, we were cast out of our home, she said, her voice carried across the planet by broadcast systems that reached every human ear. We were told we were too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable to live among civilized beings. We were sent into the darkness to die. She paused and looked out at the crowd that had gathered. Thousands of faces looked back at her. Human faces marked by the heritage of every nation that had ever existed on Earth. We did not die. We survived. We learned. We grew. And when we returned, we proved something that the galaxy had never understood. Humanity is not dangerous because we are violent. We are dangerous because we refuse to give up. We are dangerous because we face the darkness and find a way to shine. Admiral Megan Torres stood in the crowd, promoted now to command her own fleet. She thought about her grandfather, Daniel Carter, who had stood in that council chamber and been told his people were not worthy. She wished he could have lived to see this day. She wished all of them could have lived. We do not forget, Chancellor Wright continued. We remember every name, every face, every soul that was lost in the void. But we do not let anger consume us. We do not become the monsters they claimed we were. We build instead of destroy. We heal instead of hurt. We prove through our actions that humanity deserves its place among the stars. The crowd cheered. The sound rose into the sky, echoing across a planet that was learning to be home again. Ships in orbit picked up the noise on their sensors, and crews paused their work to listen. The exile was over. The long dark had ended. Humanity had returned to claim its birthright, not through cruelty or vengeance, but through the strength that had always defined them. The strength to endure. The strength to adapt. The strength to hope. Eric Santos, now retired from military service, sat in a small house near the ocean and listened to the Chancellor's speech on a radio he had built with his own hands. Through his window, he could see waves breaking on a shore that humans had walked for 100,000 years before they were driven away. He smiled and raised a glass to the sky. "We made it back," he said to no one in particular. "We made it home." Outside, the sun set over a world reborn. And somewhere in the depths of space, the darkness waited patiently, knowing that humanity would explore it again someday, not as exiles this time, but as conquerors, not running from their enemies, but walking toward their future. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, and it always would. The great hall of the Galactic Council was silent. 12 ancient species sat in judgment, their eyes fixed on the small human delegation standing at the center of the chamber. Admiral Daniel Carter felt their stares like physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. He had fought in 3 colonial wars and faced death more times than he could count. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Valkyrie High Speaker rose from his crystalline throne. His body was made of living glass, and light bent strangely around him as he moved. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like the sound of breaking ice. "The Council has reached its decision," the High Speaker announced. "Humanity is hereby exiled from the Milky Way galaxy. You are given 1 standard cycle to remove all human presence from Council space. Any humans remaining after this period will be terminated." A murmur ran through the human delegation. Lieutenant Commander Katie Morrison gripped her recording device so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream, to protest, to do something, but she knew it would change nothing. Secretary General Ryan Hughes stepped forward. He was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, but his voice remained strong. "High Speaker, I beg you to reconsider. Humanity has done nothing to deserve this punishment. We have followed Council laws. We have traded fairly. We have never attacked another species without provocation." The Thexian ambassador uncoiled from his seat. He was a serpent-like creature with 6 gleaming eyes and scales that shifted color as he moved. His forked tongue tasted the air before he spoke. "You refuse to surrender your weapons technology to Council inspection. You refuse to abandon your colonies when the Valkyrie claimed those systems. You are too dangerous to remain among civilized beings. Those colonies belong to us, Hughes replied. We built them. We settled them. The Velkari had no right to demand them. The Velkari are a founding member of this council, the High Speaker said coldly. Their claims take priority over those of a young and aggressive species like humanity. Daniel Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, but those who knew him could hear the anger beneath. So this is what the Great Galactic Council has become. A tool for the powerful to crush the weak. You speak of civilization, but you are nothing more than bullies hiding behind laws you created to serve yourselves. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Several alien delegates shouted demands for the Admiral to be arrested and executed. But the High Speaker raised one glittering hand, and silence fell once more. Your words only prove our point, Admiral Carter. Humanity cannot be trusted. You are violent, unpredictable, and you have no respect for those older and wiser than yourselves. Be grateful that we are showing mercy. Many on this council argued for your complete extermination. The decision was final. There would be no appeal, no second chance, no hope of changing their minds. News of the exile spread across human space within hours. On Earth, people gathered in the streets, staring at screens that showed the council's announcement. Some wept, some raged. Most simply stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what was happening. The evacuation began immediately. There was no time to waste if 18 billion humans were to be moved beyond the galactic rim before the deadline. Massive generation ships were pulled from mothball storage and repaired as quickly as possible. New ships were built in orbital factories that worked around the clock. Every vessel capable of carrying passengers was pressed into service. Commander Nathan Price was assigned to coordinate the final evacuation of Earth. He walked through empty cities, past abandoned homes and silent parks. The planet that had given birth to humanity was being emptied, and he could do nothing to stop it. He met a young woman named Sarah at one of the evacuation centers. She was carrying a small box that contained everything she owned. Her family had lived in the same town for 8 generations, and now she was leaving everything behind. "Where will we go?" she asked him. "What is out there beyond the galaxy?" Nathan did not have an answer. No one did. The intergalactic void was a vast emptiness, millions of light-years of nothing. No stars, no planets, just endless darkness stretching in every direction. The Council was sending humanity into that darkness, expecting them to die. The last ships lifted off from Earth on a gray morning. Nathan stood on the bridge of his vessel, the Wandering Hope, and watched as the blue and green planet grew smaller and smaller. He thought about all the history being left behind, all the memories, all the dreams. Around him, the great fleet assembled, over 10,000 ships of every size and shape, carrying the last of humanity into exile. Some were military vessels, armed and ready to fight. Most were civilian transports, crowded with families and children and old people who would never see their homeworld again. Admiral Carter broadcast a message to the entire fleet. His face appeared on every screen. His voice reached every ear. Today we leave behind everything we have ever known. The Council believes they are destroying us. They think we will drift into the void and fade away like a forgotten dream. But they are wrong. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder than steel. Humanity has faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly ended us. We have crawled out of every grave that was dug for us, and we will crawl out of this one too. The fleet crossed the galactic boundary 3 months later. Behind them, the Milky Way shrank to a spiral of light, beautiful and unreachable. Ahead lay only darkness. Katie Morrison stood at a viewport and recorded the moment for future generations. She spoke quietly into her device, her words meant for children not yet born. This is the day humanity was exiled from our home. Remember it. Remember the faces of those who condemned us. Remember the injustice. And remember that one day we will return. Nathan Price made the same silent promise as he watched the galaxy disappear. He did not know how or when, but he believed with absolute certainty that humanity would find its way back. They would return, and when they did, the galaxy would tremble. The void swallowed the fleet whole. The stars vanished. The darkness closed in from all sides. And somewhere in that endless night, 18 billion humans began their long journey into the unknown, carrying with them nothing but hope, rage, and a promise of return.